Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. Your school has been breached. Now what? Prepare, respond, and protect. I'm Karl Boehm, your host, and I'm glad to have you with us for this very important and timely session. This was originally delivered as a live workshop, but given the current affairs and increasing risk level, we wanted to make it available to more school leaders through the podcast. With cyber attacks now more of a matter of when as opposed to an if, it's becoming critical for schools to have a clear response plan. That's why Help 100 Schools and CyberClan, with support from Spiral Marketing for Schools, teamed up to share real-world strategies, tools, and guidance to help you respond to a breach and protect your school and community. In this session, we'll walk through breach simulations, show you how to communicate during a crisis, and explore long-term steps to protect your school's data and reputation. Before we dive in, let me introduce our co-presenter and now guest for today's episode, Mikel Pearce. He is the General Counsel and Breach Coach Relationship Manager at CyberClan. With over 20 years in insurance defense and nearly a decade as a breach coach, he's helped organizations of all sizes respond to cybersecurity incidents with clarity and confidence. So let's get into it.
Thank you very much, Karl. So what we wanted to talk to you about today is we're going to run through essentially a tabletop exercise to take you through a mock exercise where the school you're involved with is breached. And so what we want to do today is really talk to you about what it looks like when a school is breached. We'll talk about a hypothetical breach scenario in a step-by-step manner to take you through it and help you understand how to react if your school is breached and what sorts of steps you're going to need to take if your school is breached and how to be better prepared for that. And what the reason we do this kind of exercise is because we've found, and all of the available research indicates, that organizations that go through this kind of exercise are better prepared for breaches when they happen. And as Karl said in his introduction, with these kinds of things, it's not not if, it's when. And organizations that are prepared respond better, recover faster, and have less impact to their employees, students, and stakeholders. So we want to talk about the roles and responsibilities of each participant. And often with schools, that's the CIO, CEO, the teachers and staff, and the executive at the schools, and then to identify strengths and weaknesses in your breach response plan, if you have one, and then maybe to motivate you to prepare one or retain us to prepare one for you if you don't have one.
Perfect.
So we want to set the scene. We want to look at a hypothetical school. So you have a site of operations, that's the school building. You have approximately 100 servers, 1,000 endpoints. You've got 5 field sites. So you've got, for example, a couple of different campuses. You've got a bunch of employees, East Coast, West Coast, some in the Midwest, and you've got backups that are stored off-site. So this is a relatively large educational institution. Maybe it's a university with several different campuses. If you're in a smaller campus or a smaller school, that's fine. Maybe you have 10 servers and 100 endpoints instead of 100 servers and 1,000 endpoints. The short answer to the question, well, we're too small to be attacked, is actually no, you're not, because the only thing that threat actors look for is an open port that they can get in through. They don't care how big you are. If they can shut you down and exfiltrate data, they believe that they can get you to pay for them to either not publish the data or to return it to you. So ultimately, as much as lots of organizations will say to us when we talk to them about this kind of thing, we're too small to be attacked. No, you're not, because the reality is the larger organizations often are more protected because they have a more available budget to spend on cybersecurity measures, and so they're more difficult to attack. And so what the threat actors really look for is low-hanging fruit, and that's what you are if you don't have a cybersecurity posture or plan, or you don't understand your cybersecurity posture. So we're going to talk about an attack that happens today. So this morning you came into the office and all of your computers are locked down. You can't log into your systems. You can't access your servers. And oh, by the way, your CEO and CFO are traveling and unavailable, so they can't help you respond to this incident. your build up for the upcoming holiday period has started, and you've got staff planning for holidays or for a holiday promotion that wanted to come in on the weekend. Half of your staff work remotely, and so they can't connect at all. And you need to figure out how you're going to communicate with all of your staff without access to your email program. So the questions that we ask here with a lot of our clients are, do you have a list of cell phone numbers that you can send a mass text, or do you have an alternative means by which to communicate with your staff if you have a major shutdown or an incident, whether it's a third-party supplier incident like the recent CrowdStrike outage or an actual cyber attack, doesn't really matter if you can't communicate with your staff. You need to be able to say to staff and students and your executive and perhaps even your board, hey, we're experiencing an outage. Either A, please don't come to school, or please come to school and be prepared to, read from a paper book or whatever the case may be. But you want to be able to communicate with all of your stakeholders, and in the case of a school, staff, students, parents, board members, executive, to let them know that something is happening and to let them know that they need to be prepared for that. So then the first response step. So what do you do? What is your initial response to, oh no, all of our servers are locked down? And so generally what happens is you'll have an executive conference call to discuss the scenario and what you're going to do to respond to it. So the first question we often ask our clients about this kind of thing is, who's on that call? And do you know how to contact them? So generally you'll have the school principal, some of the executive, a board member, at least one, and probably you want more than one board member because some of the board members will say, well, do we have quorum to make decisions? And if you don't have quorum, then they won't make any decisions. And then you're stuck in a holding pattern, and that's the last thing you want. And you want somebody from IT there because you want them to come in and because you're going to have to ask your IT department, what's happening? Do we have any availability? What's been locked down? Has there been a ransom demand? Why is this happening? You want to understand the scenario before you react to it. And then the next question is, do you have an incident response team? So do you have an organization like CyberClan that can help you respond to the incident you can call right away and say, hey, we're having a problem. Can you either get somebody on site or get somebody to remote in to help us to recover and understand what's happening to us? So if you don't have an IR team on standby, maybe you should. And we'd be more than happy to help you with that. So first response steps. So we'll go through these questions. So we've dealt with the first one. How do you activate or contact your incident response team? If you don't have an incident response team, then the first question you should be asking yourselves is, do we have insurance that covers this kind of incident? Because if you do have insurance, then it's quite likely that there's a nominated incident response provider in the insurance policy. So if you don't have an incident response team and you don't have an insurance policy, pick up the phone and give us a call.
I have a question for you, Michael. May I?
Yeah, shoot.
Where do you like to keep that document stored in a way that it's actually accessible?
So this is a great question, Carl, because often people will say to us, well, that document's stored on the server. And that's not very helpful if all of your servers are locked down. So we do recommend that if you have an incident response plan and you have a contact list, print them out, keep a copy at home and a copy in your desk at work or at school, so that if you're locked out of your computer, you still have access to that data. As much as, we love to store things electronically and it's efficient and it's easy. For critical information like that, you need to keep a hard copy because you need to be able to access it if your servers are locked down. And if all of your contact details are stored on your servers and you don't have access to them, you're going to be in trouble if you're trying to contact everyone without access to that information. So please do print out a copy of that in a hard copy format. Keep a copy at home and a copy at work or in your office at school.
Great. And I'm looking at this next question. What is the relationship between your IR team and the business continuity disaster response plan, if you have one? And I think if you don't mind baking into the answer, what should a really small school do? If they don't, we're talking about 2 teams. What if we've got, a few folks that are wearing tons of hats? Then what could that look like?
So if you're in that scenario, if you're you've got 100 students in your school and you've got one IT person who's also the principal of the school, or if you are the principal or head of a school and you don't have an internal IT team, the first thing you want to do is call for help. You want to have some experts to come in and help you respond to the scenario. And it doesn't have to be CyberClan, but you want to have an experienced incident response provider to come in and take a look at your systems and say, okay, here's what you do next. And because often the first thing that inexperienced people will do is they will unplug all of the computers. And the first thing that does is it erases all of the active memory. And so all of the logs that we need to help us understand what has happened to your school are deleted. So the first thing that you do is not unplug everything from the power. You can unplug things from the internet. So disconnect the school systems from the internet. But you want to keep them powered on so that the active memory that's stored in those systems stays there. We can access it, and that will help us to understand what has happened and what the best strategies are for recovery.
That's great. Okay. And how will you communicate to employees with no corporate email access? What is the direction of what employees are allowed to say to clients, vendors, external parties?
So the first, I want to say the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. That's not why we're here. The first thing about communication is you need to have an alternative method of communication with staff, with parents, with all of your relevant stakeholders. So what you want to have is either a separate email list or a list of phone numbers that you can mass text, that kind of thing. You want to be able to say, okay, we don't have access to our email system. We can communicate with our stakeholders via text or via WhatsApp. So a WhatsApp group actually is a really, really easy and inexpensive way to communicate with other stakeholders. So if that's the case, if that's something you're interested in or you want to do in an inexpensive way, WhatsApp is really helpful for that. Lots of people are on it. Probably most of your parents are on it because they will use it to communicate with their kids or other parents. And I don't know what the kids are using these days. I'm gonna guess you don't want to have a Snapchat account for the school, and I don't know that you can send mass chats on Snapchat anyway. So anyway, you want to have an alternative method to communicate with stakeholders, and you want to be able to what you say initially, generally, and we don't generally consult on communication. But what you want to say generally is we're having an outage, we are investigating. And you should have a plan as to what to do with the students should that happen. So do you tell the students to come to school? The answer to that, in my view, is probably because you have a staff of teachers who can teach students without access to computers. We did it for decades. Surely that can be done for a day or two. So probably you do want the students to come to school. You probably want to let the parents know that the children won't be on their computers today. So you can leave the computer at home, perhaps, if they have a laptop that they take to school. But probably you can operate the school without access to the internet, but it just made classes maybe somewhat different. Maybe you have a shortened school day, but you want to have a plan for that beforehand. You want to be able to say to parents, hey, we're having a bit of an issue, but please do come to school or please don't. And that's kind of an individual decision that should be made at the school level, but make sure you understand what the plan is before the event happens rather than during, because during the event, you're going to make decisions on limited information and sometimes you'll make the wrong call. And as much as people understand that you're making decisions in a crisis, parents sometimes, aren't always the most understanding. So you're better off to have a plan beforehand so that you know going in what to do, and then you just execute the plan rather than having to make it up as you go along.
That's great. I delayed my response because I was listening to you and taking the instruction of the first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club. And, not what. But, one of the reasons I'm bringing back to that is the references to pop culture, I think, do affect and influence a number of factors. I actually just finished watching Mr. Robot. It's years late, but boy, it really does sort of crack open your imagination to how what damage could be done and how creative you might need to get in a scenario where you're having to respond or defend yourself against a situation like this. So hopefully that's a helpful segue to the next question, which what steps are you going to use to instruct IT to take prior contacting CyberClan or another resource?
Yeah. So and we get this question a lot, like, what do we do if we get attacked? And so the first answer to that is disconnect all of the available computers from the internet, because that's how the threat actor got into your system, and that's how they're going to kind of continue to move laterally through your system, is through an internet connection. Unless the threat actor is actually on premise in your school, if you disconnect the computers from the internet, you will remove the threat actor's ability to continue to access your system, to continue to steal data, to continue to encrypt your systems. So the first thing you want to instruct IT to do is to disconnect all available systems from the internet.
That's right.
Again, like I said, please don't turn things off, because what that does is it deletes the active memory, and we need that active memory to figure out what happened.
Very helpful.
Okay.
Where do you go ahead, please.
Sorry, go ahead, Karl, please.
Well, actually, I was just going to try to segue to the next set of questions. So I think we're in a good position here.
Great. So one of the things that threat actors like to do is they like to put a timer in place, and they like to say to organizations that they've attacked, you have, let's say it's 2 days to respond to us. And if you don't respond to us within 2 days, we're going to take all of the data that we exfiltrated from your systems and post it online. And they'll put a timer up on a site. They'll give you directions to access that site, and they will show you the countdown timer. So the questions that we often ask are, what do you do now? What do you do with a threat actor? So, and we can go through those a bit.
Please. No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, and I'm happy to read these if it's helpful.
Sure.
Back and forth. So the first question is, do you pay or not pay? Who decides?
So, and often this tends to be a very politically charged answer, because some schools take the position that we don't pay because we don't want to give money to criminals, and that's fine. And I certainly understand that impulse. Other schools will say, we need to get the information back, because if information about our students and staff and parents has been stolen, we need to take any step necessary to secure that information. So, and that's fine too. And ultimately, that is a decision that, again, needs to be made at the school level. The other thing about who decides, often with a school, it's the board members who will have to decide whether or not to pay a ransom. So you want to make sure that you have a reporting line direct to the board, that you have the ability to have the board members have an emergency meeting where they have quorum, and where there are enough board members present to make that decision. And what you want to make sure is that the executive at the school understands who has the ability to make a decision to pay or not to pay a ransom, and how to contact those individuals. So make sure that there's a procedure in place to contact the board, to call an emergency board meeting, and to put a proposal to the board about how to handle a given situation.
That's helpful. Do you reach out regardless?
So there's a bit of a debate in the industry about this. So there's some negotiators who say, look, we can negotiate to delay with any threat actor. You can reach out, contact them, and say, look, we're a small school, we're trying to figure this out. Give us a couple of days to get sorted out. There's another, and that's if you're thinking about paying. There's another school of thought that says, look, if you are in the boat where you're not paying, period, because maybe you have offsite backups and you don't need to pay, and you're take the position that you don't pay criminals, that's fine. In that scenario, there's a school of thought that says, don't bother reaching out to the threat actor, because if you string them along and then refuse to pay, all it does is make them angrier than they were before. And threat actors can post the data they stole, but there are a variety of ways in which they can do that. So they can post the data to the dark web, and try to sell it to other threat actors. Or they can post it to the open web and say to everyone, all and sundry, hey, we breached such and such school, and here's all of their student and parent data. So, the last thing you want to do really is antagonize an organization that has data on your students and parents, especially if it's financial data on the parents who are paying for their child to attend your school. So you want to think about whether or not you're actually engaging the threat actor to negotiate a payment, or are you just engaging the threat actor to see what they have? And so that ultimately that decision really depends on what it is your end game is. And you always want to be thinking about the end game. So you want to make sure that you're thinking not just about what to do in the next hour or 2 hours. You want to think about the objective at the end of the piece. So is your objective to negotiate with this threat actor and get a decrypted key and get your data back? Or is your objective to stall the threat actor until you figure out what the status is of your backups and then engage? And so you want to make sure that you understand your own scenario before you reach out so that at least you have a plan in place. You have an objective at the end of the piece. Here's where we want to get to. And you want to make sure whenever you're engaging with the threat actor, you always keep your end game in mind, because that will help to direct your individual interactions with the threat actor.
Scary stuff. Well, what factors go into that decision?
So factors that go into the decision of whether to pay or not. First things first, you want to determine whether or not the threat actor is a sanctioned entity, or they're using a sanctioned, or they're coming from a sanctioned country, or some sort of sanctioned cryptocurrency wallet. Threat actors often almost exclusively ask for payment in some sort of cryptocurrency, and so they'll always have a wallet destination for your payment. So you want to have an external party like CyberClan look at the threat actor, let you know whether they're a sanctioned entity, whether they're in a sanctioned country, or whether they're using a sanctioned cryptocurrency wallet. If they are, then the answer is you can't pay even if you want to. So you can't pay a sanctioned entity, you can't send money to a sanctioned country, and you can't send money to a sanctioned wallet either. So, and as much as identifying threat actors is a bit of a mugs game, often they'll tell you who they are. They will leave a note on your systems that say you've been encrypted by such and such, and here's where we are, here's how you contact us, et cetera, et cetera. So, they'll tell you who they are, and then based on that kind of information, the cybersecurity vendor you're using can let you know whether they're a sanctioned entity. So that's the first question. Can you pay? And then the question is, do you...
Can I interject?
Yeah, of course.
Why can't you pay a sanctioned entity?
So there are a variety of laws in place in the United States that prevent that, and it's actually a criminal act to pay a sanctioned entity. So please don't.
Okay.
You can be subject to significant fines and penalties. So please don't do that.
And I'm sorry if you reference it, but I didn't quite completely absorb. What is a sanctioned entity?
So, as an example, after Russia invaded Ukraine a few years ago, the U.S. government moved to put Russia on the sanctioned entities list, or the sanctioned countries list. So after Russia was sanctioned, no payments could be made that were directed to Russia by a U.S. citizen or U.S. resident. So, and then some threat actor groups like Log4j, the threat actor group that promulgated the Log4j problem, have been sanctioned, and so they're identified as sanctioned entities on the sanctions list. And the United Nations and a variety of other law enforcement agencies around the world keep sanctioned entities lists. The United States has one, and generally what happens is any entity that's sanctioned by one group tends to end up on all of the sanctions lists worldwide.
That's interesting. That's quite a fascinating extra defense mechanism. Thank you for going through that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a defense mechanism so much as it is, because ultimately what it does is, and I understand the impulse behind it, but what it really does is it prevents the victims of a crime from responding. It doesn't really do much to the perpetrator.
That's too bad. Too bad.
It's challenging for everyone.
Right. I would have hoped that, as I'm sure was the intent, that there would be more prevention from them even attempting something that would be more futile.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to law enforcement, in the last 2 years, the FBI and other international law enforcement agencies have been much more active in the cyber sphere. The FBI has taken down a number of threat actors and online markets where stolen information has been sold or auctioned off to the highest bidder. And in fact, the FBI has been helping victims of ransomware decrypt their own systems because they've been able to hack into threat actor stuff and steal decryptor keys. And so the FBI has been actively helping ransomware victims decrypt their own systems without paying threat actors. So the FBI and other international law enforcement agencies have been much more active over the last 2 years. And so one of the questions we often get is, do we contact law enforcement? And for years, the answer to that question was yes, but wait until you're finished responding to the attack. And these days, the answer is, talk to your lawyer, but probably yes, because the FBI can, in some cases, depending on the threat actor, provide actual real-time assistance. And so the question of whether or not you reach out to law enforcement has a very different answer now than it did 2 years ago.
That's positive news. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were talking about the factors for decision making of who pays
right.
and how to reach.
So one of the other factors about whether or not you're going to pay a ransom is, do you have the funds available? So do you have an insurance policy that's going to respond to the event? If not, do you have an asset fund that you can draw down on? Often the demands are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if you don't have an insurance policy that's going to help you respond to the incident, chances are especially if you're a small school, you may not have those funds available. So if the answer is you don't have the funds available, then the decision's made for you. So we always recommend to our clients, please have insurance, and make sure you get the ransomware payment as part of that insurance policy. And then the other factors that go into making the decision are, do you have offline viable backups? Because if you do, then you probably don't need to pay. But one of the questions we always ask our clients is, what are you paying for? So what is it that you're paying the threat actor to do or not do or to get from the threat actor? Are you paying to get the data back? Are you paying because you need the decryptor because you can't access your systems without it and you don't have offline backups? So you always want to, and again, this is a similar theory to what I spoke about before. Always think about the end game. So what is it you're paying for when you're paying a threat actor? The rationale for paying used to be, well, we don't want the data to get out, because we don't want to have to notify our customers and our parents and staff members and stakeholders. But these days, notification obligations often are active whether you pay to get the data back or not. And so that rationale has gone away. And then sometimes the answer is, well, we need to pay to get the decryptor, but if you have offline backups, then you don't need that. And sometimes the rationale to pay is, well, we don't want the threat actor to publish the data. And so that sometimes is enough to decide to make a payment to prevent publication. We often get the question, well, how do I know the threat actors will hold up their end of the deal? The short answer is you don't, but there is some quote unquote honor among thieves. They understand that if they get a reputation of taking a payment and then publishing the data later, that will get around, and sooner or later they won't be able to get payment from anyone. So there is that. But it is a very fraught decision.
Well, you're really painting a picture that shows that taking measures to protect yourself goes quite a long way.
Yeah.
In terms of the viability of those factors, especially for a school and their current setup, what's the interplay that you should, especially a small school, should consider for viability?
In terms of making a payment, I think you really want to understand what it is you're paying for. How much are you being asked for? What are you paying for? If you're paying from an insurance policy, what's your available insurance limit? How much of that limit are you going to use up making the payment? And would that insurance limit be better directed towards helping you with recovery, providing a defense fund for any potential third-party lawsuits arising from the breach, So you just want to look at, what are your available sources of funding, and what are your other demands going to be on those available sources? So if you have a $500,000 or $1 million insurance policy, and the threat actor is asking for $500,000 in ransomware payment, well, if you use up half of your limit on a payment to the ransomware threat actor, then you've only got the other half left for forensics, legal advice, and potential defense costs for a third-party claim. And as much as you don't want to make the decision purely based on expediency, that has to be a factor, because if you exhaust your available limits making a payment and recovering from the attack, and then you get sued and you don't have a policy in place to help you pay for the defense costs that are necessary, you're going to have a financial drain anyway. So you just want to make sure you're allocating that asset to the appropriate buckets, for lack of a better term.
That's helpful. I mean, really, I could see a board listening to this collectively and really taking notes on how do we make decisions? How do we even approach the decision making for a situation like this? So that's really helpful background. I see some notes between us around the available logging of the infrastructure that's available. Can you talk through that a little bit and help interpret for a school, of course?
Yeah. So what that's really about is, are you going to be able to find out what happened? And all of your available systems will have a certain level of log retention. And what those logs track is entry into and exfiltration from the system. So anytime somebody logs into one of your systems, it creates an entry in a log that's stored for a certain period of time. Most of the default storage periods are 7 days. Maybe some of them are 14 or 30. What we tend to recommend is 90 days, 6 months, or longer, sometimes a year of storage for those logs, because in a scenario where you're being attacked, often threat actors will get into a system and then lurk for a month or two to try to find out as much as they can about the organization that they've attacked before they drop in the ransomware that locks down the systems. And what they're looking for is financial information, insurance information, contact information for all of the executives, contact information for other parties that they can use to leverage a payment, that sort of thing. So they're looking for more and more information that they can use as leverage when they encrypt your system. So what you want to be able to do when you're investigating a ransomware event is figure out how long the threat actor has been in the system, how they got in, so that you can fix those problems moving forward. And that's what we look for when we're investigating, is how did they get in? How long were they in? What did they see and touch? How much data did they exfiltrate, if they did exfiltrate data, and where did it go? And so in order for us to find those answers, we look through the logs, because even threat actors leave a footprint within the logs as to their actions. So what the logs do is help to understand what happens so that you can prevent it from happening going forward.
Right. Lurkers.
Yeah.
Hackers lurking for months is such a creepy thought.
Yeah. It's like having someone break into your house and then, hide in a closet, and wait.
Right.
Until you're not there anymore so they can steal all your stuff. And that's essentially what a threat actor is doing.
Indeed. Yeah, that's quite a visual and appropriate. All right. And then in terms of the retention of these logs, what is that like? How long does it take to make available for understanding what happened to inform the decision?
So as long as the logs have been retained, we can access them pretty quickly. The question is, how long do they get retained for? So say, for example, you have a logging system and it only retains the logs for 7 days. And what they do is they have a rolling retention. So it only retains the last 7 days of logs. Well, if the threat actor's been in your system for more than 7 days, there won't be a log of them getting in. And so what we recommend is that you extend that retention period so that it's 30, 60, 90, 180 days, so that there's more information just in case something does happen, so we can figure out what did happen. So that's the kind of issue with the log retention. And then the question becomes, okay, where do you store those if you're retaining them for that long? The answer is we can help you with that if you want. And then you turn to the backups. Do you have offline backups? Where are they? And how do you recover? How do you recover using them? And that's the bigger question. And how long is that going to take? Often is the biggest question that we get. the most important one for the school or the organization that's been attacked is how long is it going to take us to recover? And
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Karl.
Well, I was just going to say, how do you approach that question?
So there's two streams of thought, right? There's, get the decryption key, decrypt your systems and recover, or download the backups, build up new systems and go from there. And the reason that there are two is that a lot of people think, well, if we get the decryption key, we can just flip a switch and get back up and running. And that's a fallacy, right? Even if you get a decryption key, sometimes they don't work. Sometimes they only work partially. Sometimes it takes forever for data to decrypt. So the question often is, how much data are you decrypting and how effective is that tool going to be in doing that? And often decryption can take almost as long as restoring from backups. And restoring from backups is infinitely safer because you know and you can check and test whether or not those backups were attacked by the threat actor or there's some sort of backdoor in there. If the threat actor has been in your network for longer. So if, say, for example, the threat actor has been in the network for 30 days and you back up every 7, well, the threat actor was in your network the last time you backed up. So you want to make sure you filter that data and make sure the threat actor hasn't left a backdoor in there that you stored and put in the backups. And that's often a faster process than decrypting, building a new system, and putting the decrypted data into the new system. So the reality is this isn't a days process. This is a weeks process. And it's often safer and cheaper, to be fair, because you don't have to pay the ransom to restore from backups than it is to decrypt and build a new system. So those are the kinds of decision trees that go into, what do we do now? And this is, of course, why we recommend having backups and they're offsite and air-gapped so that they are safe and that you can then use them to get back up and running. And that way you don't have to pay the threat actor.
Can experts like CyberClan analyze a backup?
Yes. Yeah. We can analyze, filter, and sanitize a backup relatively quickly and get you back up. If they're available, we can get you back up and running relatively quickly. The biggest hurdle with backups is often downloading the data from the third party that's storing the backup. But that's just a pipeline issue. How big is your pipeline? How much bandwidth do you have? And how much data are we talking about? With a small school, you're probably not talking about a ton of data. As the schools get bigger, obviously the data storage gets bigger. So sometimes with threat actors, what they will do is they start emailing your staff, parents, and suppliers to say, hey, we hacked this school. So, what do you do then? And the short answer is there isn't much you can do because once they have the information, they will use it to try to extort you. So what you're thinking about now, though, is what do we do now? So the best thing in this scenario is you want to have a plan for how you communicate with staff, students, parents, and other stakeholders about this kind of communication. You want to get out in front of it, and you want to make sure that everyone knows not to respond to that kind of communication. And that's the biggest thing is you want to tell people not to respond to that kind of communication. They can let you know that they're getting it, but if they respond, all you're doing is encouraging the threat actor. So the first part of any communication about that kind of thing is please don't respond because all it does is feed the beast, essentially.
That's helpful and makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, feel free to flow through how and when will you respond to your customer inquiries about this? Yeah. Who will prepare and lead the response?
So, and ultimately, you want to have the executive at a school thinking about how to respond. You want to have the executive leading that response because they are going to be seen as the authority by parents and students and staff. And so they should be the ones leading that communication. They should be the ones setting the tone. Often, if you do have an insurance policy that you're using to help respond, there will often be a crisis communications coverage in that policy. And so you can have an expert come in and help you with those crisis communications, help you craft them, help tell you, what the best way to communicate with people is, what sorts of things you should say, what sorts of things you shouldn't say. So that's always helpful if you are in a scenario where you have to communicate with staff, students, parents in a crisis scenario. You probably want someone helping you to do that.
So really it's the head of school. It's the head of
Yes.
school in this case who would be responding. That makes sense.
Yes.
Sorry, heads of school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Their job
Sorry about
wasn't hard
that,
enough.
but unfortunately, that does tend to fall on you. It's a bit like being a quarterback. You get more praise if you win and more blame if you don't, even though it's not really only you.
Exactly. Well, let's translate this next one for schools. What do you say to account managers who are getting inquiries from the accounts they manage?
Right. So that's really, what do you say to teachers who are getting inquiries from parents about the kids in their class or about their information? And so ultimately, that's really, you want to have crisis communications support to help you respond to the parents, because especially if you are a private school where the parents are paying for the children to attend, you want to make sure that you're communicating with them adequately and in an upfront manner. My own view on that, and this is not legal advice, but my own view on that is you want to get out front of that communication. You want to make sure you keep the parents as informed as possible, because you're better off that way. You're better off being seen as having been transparent, and you're better off over communicating, in my view, than under communicating, because under communication tends to lead to more questions, and then you lose the trust of the parents. And once you've lost that, then you really are behind the eight ball.
Well, that's a good segue to the next question, which is there a way for you to stop the threat actors from contacting your clients, your students, your student families? Does this affect your strategy? How?
Yeah. So the only way to do that is to pay them. If that starts, the only way to get it to stop often is to pay the threat actor. And that's why they do it, of course. They do it as a motivating tactic, as leverage. There isn't an electronic way you can block those communications, but often that sort of thing has to be done on individual email accounts if that's how they're communicating with people, and that is up to the owner of the email account. So you can go around and individually help individual parents, block a given sender on their email account, but then the threat actors often just change the email they're sending the communications from. So that doesn't tend to be effective. But ultimately, if it gets to that stage, the only way to stop them often is to pay them to stop.
It's sad, but makes sense. And how about this endpoint visibility?
So
we can define that a bit.
Yeah. So these next few questions are really about your IT team and about whether or not you have the ability to view your systems, to segment your network, and to make sure that everything is secure, so that you can have a segmented portion of the network that you can get up and running more quickly and help the students and staff and parents continue as normal. What you really are looking for is, can we get to a point where we can operate our network and be certain that it's secure? Okay, so let's talk about this. So one of the things that threat actors often do is they steal or exfiltrate data. And what they often do with that data, they use the data as leverage to get you to pay the ransom. But if you're in a scenario where either you don't want to pay the ransom, you can't for a variety of reasons, or you've decided not to because, for example, you have offline backups, what the threat actors will often do in response is post the data on the dark web. So the question then is, what are you going to do about that? And again, this is much more, if you've decided not to pay and the threat actors post data online, what you're really talking about here is a communication strategy about the data and about that. So do you have a breach response plan? Again, I know we've belabored that point a fair bit, but do you have a breach response plan? What does the breach response plan say about how you respond to this kind of thing? If you don't have one, you really want to talk to your board, talk to your executive about what you would do in this scenario. How would you respond if you had a threat actor who was threatening to post data online and then did so? The short answer to this is, again, because it's a communication strategy, you want to be out in front. You want to be telling people that their data has been posted before it happens or as it's happening, rather than weeks or months later. And lots of jurisdictions have timelines on how long you have to respond to this kind of action by a threat actor if data is exfiltrated or stolen. and posted online or exposed, there are timelines within which you have to notify the people whose data has been stolen or exfiltrated. So you want to make sure you get legal advice about that and about how to make that communication.
That makes sense. I think a segue might, because I'm sort of estimating what a listener might be feeling at this point. And, I think overwhelm is probably an appropriate response and likely. Now, I think that it would be good for them to understand what is it like to work with a partner like CyberClan, and how can you really help them at a high level prevent, approach, response, and what does that partnership look like?
So if we're working in partnership with you in advance of a breach like this, what we can do is we can come in, look at your network. We can install a piece of software on your network that allows us to monitor, protect, and defend your network 24/7, 365 to prevent a threat actor from ever getting in. Obviously, there's a cost for a service like that, but certainly that is an option for lots of schools. We can be cost effective in terms of providing services to smaller schools. We as an organization cut our teeth on the nonprofit sector when we first started, so certainly we are aware of cost concerns. There are a variety of other options leading up to full-on defense and monitoring of a school's system. What we like to do with any and all of our clients is meet them where they are. So we'll go in, take a look around, say, where are you now? What does your security setup look like now? And how do we help you get better? And so we call it, and Jane coined this, and she said, let's look at a good, better, best approach. And so what we want to do is say, okay, where are you now? How do we help you improve to get you to the next step? And let's look at a plan, say a 3 or 5 year plan, that helps you to improve your cybersecurity every year so that at the end of the plan, you're fully secure and you can say to all of your teachers and students and parents, hey, we've been on this journey together and we've really improved our cybersecurity, improved how we store your data, improved how we do all of the things that are necessary in a modern electronic environment. And so, we can start with, for example, email security. 90% of threat actor attacks still come through email. So often the lowest cost option in starting a cybersecurity journey is email security. And then the next one is employee training. Employees, so your staff and other teachers are your biggest strength, but they're also your biggest weakness. If you have 100 staff, including your teaching staff, it only takes one person to click on the wrong link in an email to expose you to a threat actor. So we want to do some employee training and make sure your employees and staff understand what to look for when threat actors are sending spoofing emails or phishing attacks. And so those are the two kind of biggest bang for your buck investments that we recommend most smaller organizations make: email security and employee education. And then we can look at and talk about a cybersecurity journey from there. But we really do want to bring as many organizations into our environment as possible and get them started on a cybersecurity journey. As Lao Tzu said, the journey of 1,000 steps or 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So if you start taking steps now, you'll be better off tomorrow, better off at the end of the year, better off next year. So the real trick is starting now.
If a breach happens, what are some critical mistakes schools might make in response, particularly with communications?
So in terms of the communications, these days, most organizations are at least understand that they have to get out in front of the communication piece. There still are organizations who say, we just want to lock everything down, not tell anyone anything, and bury our heads in the sand. To me, that is a critical mistake, because ultimately it's going to come out. Whatever happens, someone is going to find out, because our systems are too interconnected these days for people not to find out. A student will find out because their computer's acting funny, or a teacher will find out because their computer's acting funny. A parent will find out because the student went home and said, hey, mommy, something happened with the computers at school today. It was weird. We had to go back to using textbooks. Like, these things aren't really containable anymore. It's as simple as that. And so from my perspective, the biggest mistake is trying to bury these things and not communicate about them. You're much better off. And some of that stems from, I think, earlier opinions about cybersecurity attacks, that there was this kind of reputational harm that companies and organizations like schools were worried about if they were attacked by a threat actor. And ultimately, what we found is through the years, there's a couple of factors that go into the idea that that reputational harm piece is really fading, because what that's really about is there being some sort of something special about not having been attacked. And because so many organizations have been attacked, that's fading. And so there's less stigma attached now to organizations that do sustain a cybersecurity attack. And so you're better off getting out in front of it and being proactive with your communications and saying, yes, we had an incident, we're investigating, we're doing everything we can to secure your data. That's kind of the best, in my view, that's the best stance to take should you sustain a cybersecurity incident from a communications perspective.
That's great. And good question, folks. Thank you. I see another from Sue, which says, I'm at a very small school. We don't have really an IT team, where our resources are stretched, very, very little budget. We're a new school. Mm-hmm. What are some of the most important practical steps that we can take to protect ourselves?
So for an organization like that, the practical steps, so first things first, you want to make sure that your employees understand what to look for in terms of phishing emails. So employee education is really kind of bang for your buck. There are a variety of programs online that you can tap into that will help your employees understand how not to fall victim to a phishing attack or other email-based attack. And then the next step up is email security. So, and those are the two things. And because 90% of attacks are still coming through email, that's your biggest weakness and the thing that you should be looking at first. The other thing is, if you don't have IT staff, there are a lot of organizations, CyberClan included, that can provide IT support on a fractional basis. So we can provide you with, say, 10 or 12 or certain number of hours per week in IT support, so that you have an external IT vendor who's at least looking at your systems on an ongoing basis to help you keep them patched. So you want to make sure that your systems are patched, you're using the latest software, you have a firewall that's operating. Those kinds of things are things that an IT vendor can help you do and can help you set up, and can do that on a less than full-time basis. So that's something you should probably look at as well, is getting an IT vendor in on an hourly basis, and providing a certain number of hours per month of IT support so that you have an ongoing resource there that you can talk to about how to do certain things from an IT perspective.
Excellent. Is that a digital managed service provider?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we're right approaching time, and I want to make sure that we have the information that we need in order to get questions to you after the fact, and if we need help. So do you have the contact information that we can provide here?
Yes.
For those who are listening and watching. Very good. Okay. Well, Michael, is there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap up?
The only thing that I would say is if you are hesitant about starting a cybersecurity journey, please do give us a call. The first call costs nothing. We're more than happy to talk to you about where you are now. We can meet you where you are now and help you start your cybersecurity journey. And the best time to start is now. Yesterday is gone, but today is still here. So start today or start tomorrow, but start.
Very helpful. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you all for joining us today for Your School Has Been Breached. What now? Prepare, respond, and protect. We hope you're leaving with a stronger understanding of the steps needed to protect your school's community and reputation in the face of a cyber breach. Remember, preparation is key, and today you have taken a significant step toward building a resilient defense against cyber threats. Huge thank you to CyberClan and Spiral Marketing for Schools for their support in making this event possible. Thank you all so much, and let us know if you have any questions at any point. We'll make sure you obviously have our contact information now. All right. Thank you so much.